Hi there, Rich Cooper of Space Foundation here. Thank you for joining us for our two-part conversation with inventor and creator Dean Kamen. In the first part of this program, you're going to hear what his thoughts are about STEM education, as well as the makings of what is a really unique instrument that the U.S. Mint has made available to everyone to celebrate the life of a true American pioneer, but then also the difference that STEM education can make in the lives of many. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to a very special version of our Space4U podcast. If you've been a listener over the past 3 years, you know it's been our goal to share the stories of the amazing men and women around the world that make today's adventure with space possible. Those conversations have included engineers and astronauts, writers and musicians, as well as newsmakers and innovators that bring inspiration and knowledge to life. Today, we continue that tradition of engaging conversations, but are doing it in a more unique way than usual. We're doing this program visually. Why, you might ask? Because today's conversation in particular lends itself to some additional showing to the regular telling that we impart with each Space4U episode. Today, we're joined by an amazing inventor and creator whose works have not only transformed and saved millions of lives, but brought mobility to millions in ways once unimagined. His name is Dean Kamen, and as much as he's been an inventor and creator, he's been a tremendous pioneer and advocate for STEM education. It's safe to say every continent and community have been touched by his works, and we at Space Foundation are humbled and thrilled at the opportunity to share this most unique of Space4U episodes with you. Dean, welcome to Space4U.
It's good to be here. It's good to be back. Thank you.
Dean, you have an amazing career as a pioneering inventor and creator. That work has saved lives literally around the globe, and you've revolutionized healthcare and human mobility. What's been the inspiration for you to do these things? Was there a particular moment that sparked you, that told you this is the path I want to go down?
I don't think there was a particular moment, but I would say even as a young kid, the path was becoming clearer and clearer because of the intersection of a lot of things that I began to realize even as I was going into middle school. One, I didn't like being told what to do. I didn't like being told by my parents. I wanted to understand what they wanted me to do, and if it made sense, I think by free will I would choose to do it. I would take their advice as opposed to an order. I like to listen to teachers that had interesting things to convey and that we could learn, but I wasn't crazy about being judged by them, being quizzed and getting tests and getting them to bestow their opinion on me. I just didn't like it. I was uncomfortable. And I, as a kid, realized that school is supposed to be a fun experience, and it's not much of your day. It's short compared to how long Dad works, and you get all summer off. And all I could think of was, if school's supposed to be the fun years, and I don't like it, and I don't like to be told what to do by a teacher, it's going to be really awful if I grow up and have, quote, a job and a boss. So I decided as I was pretty young, I better figure out something to do so I'll never need a job and I'll never have a boss. I also started getting more and more fascinated by looking at the world around me and trying to understand it. And school was, to me, giving me a very superficial review of things that if you could spit it back, they claimed you understood it. No, you're just familiar with it. They told you that this one or that one determined that the world is round and not flat. Everybody laughs at the concept that the world is flat because you've been told it's round. But you go to the beach and you see the ocean and it looks pretty flat, and you wonder if there's people somewhere else. Are they really pointing in a different direction and the ocean isn't going to run away? I don't know. I think understanding fundamental concepts of how the world works started to fascinate me. Why is it that a hot cocoa would always, in a very predictable way, cool off and get warm? Why would that cold soda with the ice cubes in it always warm up? Why, when I bounce the ball, it bounced this high, then a little less, then a little less, then a little less, and a little less, and then it stopped bouncing. Did the ball have a memory? How did it know how high to bounce the second time? Did it have an onboard computer? How could a simple rubber ball so predictably and consistently bounce less each time? How did it know? I looked at the world around me. Why, when I spin a gyroscope, will it stay on the end of that needle? But it looks symmetric and round and shiny, so unless you touch it, you can't even tell that it's spinning. If it's not spinning, it'll fall over. If it is spinning, it won't fall over. How does the Earth know it's spinning? I was fascinated by how predictable the world seemed to do things, but I had no sense of how it worked. And even at a young age, I remember the statement that Einstein once had made: the most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it's comprehensible to those that are deep thinkers. And I started to realize, again, at a pretty young age, that the textbook that gives you a one-liner like Newton's law, F equals ma, is not going to give you a deep visceral understanding of forces, masses, accelerations, and their relationship. But if Isaac Newton was such a great genius, as we all know he was, and he spent his entire life trying to come up with an understanding of a few basic important things, if the greatest genius of all time spent his whole life coming up with this and writing in the book, how am I, just some dumb kid, supposed to fully understand it because it was a paragraph in a textbook that I got to spend 3 minutes on? So I went and I got copies of Principia, written by Isaac Newton. I got copies of Two New Sciences, written by Galileo Galilei. I got copies of Euclid's Elements, Archimedes, and I just found it so astounding to read directly that which was given to us by 2,000 years of geniuses. And there's not that many of these guys and women. And so as I was growing up, I decided I want to really learn physics and mathematics, the language of the universe. I want to develop skill sets so I never have to have a job. I want to be able to create things that are important to people, and I know how to do that. I'll use those laws of physics and rules of engineering that I'm trying to understand at a basic level. I'll try to be creative about how to apply those things and solve huge problems for people. And obviously the easiest place to find a huge problem is healthcare. I'm not a guy that can figure out with some sales or marketing technique how to tell you to buy the next stupid fad product. But I was pretty sure that if people have a medical need and we could develop a technology to eliminate pain and suffering, we would improve people's lives. I could make a living doing it. I could feel good about that. I could learn about all sorts of interesting phenomena, and life would be good. So by the time I got into high school, I had made up my mind. I'm going to study math. I'm going to study physics. I'm going to read as much as I could about the real basics of what we do know about this universe of ours. And I would try to address some basic human problems that had not been met in a way that leaves people happy, and see if I could come up with some better solutions to old problems. And so far, I've been spending most of my life doing exactly that.
I've been very successful at it too. Did you have a particular teacher that inspired you or that helped you get on that path and introducing you to some of the people that you mentioned? Certainly you mentioned Newton, you mentioned Aristotle, you mentioned Galileo there. Was there a teacher that opened that door for you?
I guess the most basic teacher I would claim opened that door is a teacher called Mom. She was a high school teacher, but also my mom. And while she was not at all happy when I didn't do well in school and said I really wasn't committed to meeting their standards, I'd rather get an education than a diploma. I think she supported my efforts to do other things. I think in school, inevitably, every year I'd find some teacher or other, or while it's still in public school, or even when I went off to college, I'd find a teacher, or at college a professor that was willing to talk to me and help me understand things I was having trouble with that might not have been part of that junior high school or high school curriculum or that college course. But I would show up and I would find there were certain teachers that if they could see that you were earnest and you were trying to learn and you were having an issue, that if they gave you the insight, go study this or go read that, or here's what your issue is, I think they respected my serious attempt to learn, even though I wasn't very serious about their particular curriculum. And so, yes, I have a whole host of teachers that I would have to credit with helping me develop the skill sets I now have and the attitude I have about learning.
What about an inventor? Was there a particular inventor that inspired you? You mentioned Galileo and Newton were inspirations, but was there an inventor that stood out to you that you thought to yourself, that's a path I could follow?
Maybe, I'm not sure how much of a path to follow, but I think the Wright brothers, not as much because of the particular invention of a controlled heavier than air machine that flies, but as much because they were always historically scoffed at for being uneducated. They were just a pair of brothers that owned a bicycle shop. I was just a guy in the basement that was building things. But I think the more you look historically at how subtle their assessments were of control surfaces, of thrust. They made counter-rotating propellers and they optimized it without computational fluid dynamics that's common today, without a lot of the well-known aeronautical principles. They were the right combination of imagination, intuition, focus, hard work, observation, and I think they demonstrated a broad base of engineering skills, of craftsmanship, of focus on solving a problem that most people thought was beyond reason. And so in many ways, I think Wilbur and Orville Wright represent kind of the poster child for what a real inventor ought to be. People that work really, really hard, that fail but never give up until they succeed. And I think they meet that criteria. And of course, I love aviation. I fly helicopters, I fly airplanes. So I'd say the Wright brothers deserve a lot of recognition, and they ought to be a role model for a lot of inventors.
You have a tremendous passion for STEM education and have dedicated significant time and resources to it. What do you see as the state of STEM education? Do you see some of the challenges that employers and other leaders speak of?
Well, for more than 30 years, I've been making the same statement. I almost feel guilty that people say, boy, he never changes. But for more than 30 years, I've been telling government leaders in this country, 4 or 5 different presidents that have invited our teams to the White House, corporate leaders, and I have 3,700 corporate sponsors, university leaders, and we have over 100 university members of FIRST, teachers from all over the country, from 80,000 schools. I tell them all the same thing. The problem that 30 years ago everybody said this country has, and to your point, many people are still saying that this country has, is we have an education crisis. I'm an inventor, right? What do inventors do? Inventors look at the same problems as everybody else, but see them differently. And half of a great invention isn't what you did to solve the problem. Half of, or more in many cases, of what makes a great invention is an insight that makes you rethink what the actual problem is and focus attention on solving the right problem. So more than 30 years ago, I founded FIRST on the premise that we don't have an education crisis at all. We've got great schools and great teachers. We spend more money per capita on education than any place in the world. Well, if we don't have an education crisis, people would ask, why aren't we producing enough scientists? Why aren't we producing enough engineers? Why are particularly women and minorities doing so badly in these subjects that they can't prepare themselves for careers there? If we don't have an education crisis, what is it? Very simple. We have a culture crisis. And I said that more than 30 years ago. It's not what we don't have enough of, good teachers, good schools. It's what we have too much of. We've created by then a very rich society, and a very rich society full of parents that mean very well and want to give their kids everything. Free time, leisure time, go out and have fun. We created an entire culture which has superheroes from the world that's about fun. Our superheroes by 30 years ago were from the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, Grammy Awards and Tony Awards and Academy Awards. We have a culture that would make superheroes and role models out of people from Hollywood and other entertainment and sports. Well, that's all great, but those fields of human endeavor, as important as they are and as fun as they are not what can sustain a quality of life, a standard of living, our security system, our healthcare system. So I said, look, in a free culture where you get the best of what you celebrate, America, which you claim has an education crisis in our schools are still producing the best football players and basketball players and baseball players. And by the way, many of those great athletes are coming from the, quote, inner city schools that don't have parquet floors where they produce great basketball players, so it's not money. They don't have sod fields. They're producing the great football players. So what's going on there? Oh, I know. The culture of the country has convinced particularly women and minorities that their future lies in the world of sports and entertainment. Their road to success, financial and otherwise. And every young adult that African-American kids and girls could see, every one of these young people that they could aspire to be like was in the world of entertainment or sports. You could walk out on the street in any city or any little town in this country and ask any kid, can you tell me the name of a famous living athlete, football player, basketball player? Can you tell me who won the Super Bowl or the World Series? And then you look at these kids and say, can you tell me the name of a famous living mathematician, engineer, physicist, inventor? Well, in a free culture where you get what you celebrate, particularly women and minorities, we're certainly not celebrating people from the world of technology. And nobody was out there in our culture telling them, by the way, we all love to play sports, but you do realize that you have a greater possibility of making $1 million by winning a state lottery than ever making a penny in professional sports. There are more lottery winners than professional athletes, but there are millions and millions of jobs, not just jobs, but careers out there for kids that have developed that muscle hanging between their ears, that know how to solve exciting problems, that can improve quality of life for their community and their country. But nobody was delivering that message. As a consequence, we got what we deserved. We have a country that produces the world's best athletes in entertainment, but we were falling short in these other areas. So what's another thing that I think good inventors do? And that's don't reinvent anything that already works. Just fill in the missing pieces to get to the next place. When we made a Segway, we didn't invent the wheel, the battery, the microprocessor, the solid state gyroscope or accelerator. We just systems integrated them and only invented the things that were missing. So 30 years ago, I said, let's start an organization that uses what already works. We know what makes kids passionate, sports and entertainment. Let's create a sport. Let's make sure it's entertaining. Let's make sure that all kids that see it will realize, wow, I can do this. It's more accessible. It's more fun than anything else I can do. Except in this particular sport, I developed the skill sets for a career. And I set out and I told people back then, I'm going to create a sport that will compete not with the science fair, not for the nerds. I'm going to create a sport that is as exciting as any other sport kids do. It'll compete directly for their hearts and minds and time. The only difference between my sport and all the others is mine will be the only sport where every kid can turn pro. And I set out to make FIRST. I called it FIRST because I didn't want the word education in there because we don't have an education problem. And I never saw kids at a sporting event running around cheering, I want to be second. They want to be second or third or nth in math or physics. They don't want to take some of these courses at all. They want to take this one pass fail. But in sports that are supposed to be just for fun, that they want to be first. That they want to be on the varsity team. Okay, we'll form an organization, a not-for-profit. We'll call it FIRST, for inspiration and recognition of science and technology. I want to be first at something that matters. I want to inspire kids. I want them to recognize science and technology. It wasn't that complicated. So we made a sport, and I was pretty convinced that if we could get superheroes from industry that has the superheroes of tech and put those people, and hopefully some of them will be young and women and minorities, and those kids will see not the stereotypical, terrible, comical version of scientists as old nerds. I said, let's get industry to supply some role models the way the NBA and the NFL supply role models to kids that'll spend 10 hours a day bouncing a ball. Let's go to the schools, give them an opportunity to create a team. Let's go to the colleges and have them show up and do their scouting for our kids the way they now do at all of our events. And I just said, let's use all the trappings of every other sport, create a sport that will change the lives of these kids and give them exciting futures. I started it, and in the first year, I think we had 20 some odd teams. The second year, almost 50 teams. The third year, about 100 teams. The fourth year, about 200 teams. This is a nice growth. By last year, we had something like 80,000 teams. We were in almost every country in the world. We have more or less 1 million kids being directly involved. We have an alumni organization that's way bigger than that. And I hope that history is going to show that FIRST was there 30 years before what we're now seeing industry and governments starting to recognize. They're all claiming we have a diversity problem, we have an equity problem, and they all think they can start at the top and fix that. What they got to recognize is you got to start young. Kids at a young age all have to start developing enough of the tool sets to create for themselves exciting careers, to become part of an exciting future. Otherwise, the inequities will get worse. And otherwise, these kids won't have a future, because not only are great new jobs and careers opening up due to new technologies, but some of those technologies are eliminating some of the jobs that you used to be able to have if you weren't techie. Almost every boring, dangerous, manual labor job you can think of now has been replaced by a machine or a robot. So it's critical, more critical than ever now, if we want to get global fairness and global distribution of equity and wealth, we've got to get global distribution among young kids that makes them aware that they got to work hard to develop the skill sets they need for a future. And oh, by the way, we got to show them how much fun it is to understand technology and be able to use it. That's what FIRST does.
You talked about fun and inspiration that come from doing this type of work. One of the persons that's obviously been an inspiration to educators in this arena is Krista McAuliffe, America and the world's first teacher in space. You have, at UN, the FIRST team, have developed a relationship with the McAuliffe family. Can you tell us a little bit about how your paths connected and how the McAuliffe family is working with you and the FIRST team to create that new generation of talent that you've just described?
So more than 30, now almost 40 years ago, I moved my parents up here. My mom's a teacher, as we said. My dad's an artist, a commercial artist. And soon after I moved them up out of New York, up to New Hampshire, where I am, it was announced that NASA was going to had selected the first ever teacher to be put into space. And it turned out to be a woman named Krista McAuliffe, a teacher from New Hampshire. Soon after that announcement, the then governor of New Hampshire, who I had gotten to know, called me and said, I know your father's an artist, Dean. Is there any chance if we, the state, would send your mom and dad down to watch the launch live? He would, create some sketches down there that he could come back and give art that we could put in the State House and around the state to forever memorialize this exciting event. And of course, that would be an honor. And of course, I told my mom and dad, you got to go do this. And sadly, my mom and dad were down at the Cape live. They watched the Challenger take off, and they were there live when that thing exploded. And instantly, everybody on board was gone, all 7 astronauts. Well, obviously, it was tremendous trauma to my parents. They came back, and a couple of years later, as FIRST started getting real roots up here, I had an idea. FIRST was founded in New Hampshire. The first teacher in space was somebody that was from New Hampshire. She is now a national hero. She gave her life in that pursuit. So I went back to my dad and said, let's make that artwork after all, but make a portrait of her that would be appropriate for the front of a commemorative silver dollar. Let's make a scene of her with students for the backside of a coin with that famous statement that she had made, I touch the future, I teach. And let's see if we can make a commemorative coin with the name FIRST on it as well. And then we'll use that coin for 2 important things: to show the country that we do care about and want to honor our teachers, like my mom, but we also want to use it to promote FIRST. And it would be a national coin, obviously, and it would help us around the country make more awareness for FIRST. And all the proceeds above the cost of making the coin as part of the project, commemorative coin project, would be delivered to FIRST to help support more teams. Well, in 1990, a couple of years after the Challenger disaster, I went down to Washington with the FIRST artwork of both the front and back of that coin, and tried to get a piece of legislation that said we're going to make a commemorative coin, the proceeds of which support FIRST. And I was pretty much, politely, but pretty much laughed out of the place. They said, there's no chance you're going to get this for a new little organization. I went back in 2000, 10 years later, when we had a lot more teams. They gave me sort of the same answer. I went back in 2010. That's 20 years later. My father had recently passed just before that, and they pretty much gave me the same answer, and I was running out of patience. 7 or 8 years later, in 2018, I was determined we're going to get our coin. Our time had come. I gave the homework to every FIRST team to write their senator and write their congressman and tell them we need their support, because you need a 2/3 majority in the Senate and a 2/3 majority in the House to ever get a commemorative coin issued. And back in that year, as in the middle of the last administration, there wasn't a lot of cooperation between the two parties. But nonetheless, with the support of the whole FIRST community, where we have teams in every state and pretty much every congressional district, we got all the votes we needed. They produced the coin, and in the next few weeks, I'm going to be sending them out as my gifts to everybody I'm always struggling with a holiday gift for. By the way, the coins will only be minted for the year 2021. So you have about 18 or 19 days left to order a coin. It's a beautiful silver dollar. You can get them in proof or uncirculated. I think the market value of this silver alone in this silver dollar is now about $20. And by the way, not only do we have my father's artwork now done by those fantastic engravers on the front, and that great statement, I touch the future, I teach, on the back, but we actually have on this coin the name of our organization, FIRST, and our logo, that circle, that triangle, and that square all interlocked. They are on the coin. It is a FIRST coin. And I think everybody in this country ought to know at least one teacher or one FIRST supporter that deserves to have one of these beautiful coins. And we should get, if you don't order them in the next few days, which you can get them from FIRST or from the Mint, you'll never be able to get them again. So it's also a good investment. But we finally got our coin. It only took me 30 some odd years, but it's like every other project I've ever embarked on. It became an instant overnight success after a few decades.
Thanks for joining us for part one of our conversation with Dean Kamen. In part two, he'll weigh in more on what's happening with STEM education today, but he'll also weigh in on what's happening with today's global space ecosystem, and if he were to fly to space, who his co-pilot might be. You'll find that out in part two of our conversation with Dean Kamen. And remember, at Space Foundation, we always have space for you. Thanks.